Hello everybody, my name is JebDeb, and welcome to my opinions on Like a Dragon Gaiden and whether you should buy it or not. Granted, the game came out a month ago, so if you wanted to make that decision for yourself, you would have already made it, but maybe you're still on the fences about it, and maybe this video will help you either buy it or not buy it. Depends on who you are. So, first off, I'm just going to go ahead and say that I am personally of the belief that this game should have spent a little bit more time in development. It does feel a little lackluster, and we'll get into some of the various points. Somewhere in editing, I'll have like a pro and a con thing that'll randomly drop text down and shit. So first off, we're obviously going to talk about the pros, because I feel like the most important thing is, you know, the pros and the cons. So the pros is, it is very smooth running. It never chugged, it never glitched, it didn't do any of that for me, so it is a well-polished game. Another thing that I really liked about it is that they have two styles, and they allow style switching again. And each style has its own battle theme, much like in Judgment. Every style has its own battle theme. Which I also like. It puts more emphasis on the street fights whenever you get into one. Another thing I really like, too, is, like, some of the gadgets in the agent style are really fun, like the serpent shoes and the firefly. I feel like some of those are really cool. Another thing I like, too, is, like, the wide variety of, like, mini-games you can do. There's mahjong, there's shogi, there's karaoke, there's all the stuff you can do with the castle, with, you know, the casino and all that stuff. And then they brought back Pocket Circuit, sub-stories have been reworked into some sort of way, and the Coliseum actually is like a more full-fledged Coliseum and stuff. So, I personally think there is a lot to do if you're looking to keep yourself busy in Gaiden. Some other things I like about Gaiden 2 is I really like some of the songs. For example, the sub-story boss theme, which is called Cold Fire, is one of my favorite tracks from the game, along with the final boss theme. Speaking of which, a fantastic final boss. The final boss for Gaiden is absolutely fantastic. Probably one of my favorites. Full stop. It was a really good fight, good song, good like set piecing, good theming. It was a really good fight. And also fairly challenging. It handed me my technically second game over, so, you know. And there's tons of others I can go for. However, though, let's go over some of the other stuff. So first off, Like a Dragon Gaiden is a short game. Yakuza games normally are about like 12 chapters or so. This game is like 5 chapters, so this game is really short. And if you're not doing a lot of side content, the chapters aren't really that long. So theoretically, you could be done with this game very quickly, which may be a pro or a con to some people. Another thing that may be worth noticing is that this game is, if I'm correct, about like $50 to $60. There's no digital deluxe edition or anything of the game, so it is on the cheaper side, especially compared to Infinite Wealth, which is going for like $70. So, it is a cheaper game. And also, while there is a lot of like mini-game content, there's not really much reason to do them, because another thing about it is that the sub-stories changed. So it's no longer you go into the streets and you talk to someone and, you know, you start a sub-story. You basically have a thing, a network, the Akame network, and that's your sub-stories. That's where you find your sub-stories. There are a lot of cool sub-stories in there. I'm not going to say any of them because this is a spoiler-free video, essentially. So, there's no spoilers here. So, there's a sub-story in which you do meet a character, though, that made me pop really hard. And there's a lot of other ones in general that are pretty fun and engaging, but a lot of the other ones are like, you added all of these mini-games, but there's not really many sub-stories that get involved with them in the first place. Like, Mahjong came back, but there's no Mahjong sub-story. Another thing, too, is with the game has a very heavy emphasis on like wearing equipment and wearing gear. So when I played Gaiden, I did a no gearless run, and you do fight a lot of enemies that use a lot of weapons. Specifically a lot of blades and guns, especially towards the ends. Towards the ends of the game, pretty much every group encounter has some sort of blade, gun, or a mix of the two. So, if you're not using like gear that provides resistance to that, you're gonna have a little bit of a struggle. Another thing I really like about Gaiden 2 is the fact that you can change Kiryu's clothes. You can't really change them to anything crazy, but you can change them, which is cool. So if you wanted, Kiryu to be wearing a normal-ass white t-shirt, you can do that. Or you can have Kiryu, wearing some Joe Amon-inspired gear. Whatever you want. Another thing, too, is that with the game being short, the styles don't really have much, in-depthness to their upgrading. Because, fun fact, when you get into the game, there's no XP points. It is back to using money to learn things, and Akame points. So, naturally, there's not really much else you can really do with them. Especially if you're not doing if you're doing a gearless run, Akame points are pretty much worthless after you get all the abilities you need. So I feel like they could have had, more stuff that you can strive towards, but that just would have been them making the game longer. Another thing is, if you never played Yakuza 6 and Yakuza 7, you're not going to really understand what's going on, because Like a Dragon Gaiden is pretty much the transfer period between 6 and 7. It's all of those events. So, if you haven't played Yakuza 6 or 7, or 6 and 7, you gotta kind of play both of them. If you haven't played both of those games, you should probably play those games first before playing Gaiden, so that way you can be fully immersed in the Kiryu story. Although if you're looking to buy Gaiden, you've probably already played or have seen playthroughs of 6 and 7. Another thing, too, is that, getting into some of the cons here, first con is the agent style feels a little lackluster to me in some departments. Maybe it's just because I like the big, raw damage of the Yakuza style, but it feels like the unarmed stuff of the agent style is pretty weird. And also they added juggling from the Judgment series into it, but honestly I never really viewed Kiryu as much of a person who could do juggling. That seemed like more of a Yagami thing for me. But the fact that he can do it in such a small amount, I believe you only get a 6-second time frame for juggling, whereas in Judgment you could do it forever, really. So I feel like adding juggling, just wasn't really needed. I mean, it's cool, but I feel like, it's not quite Kiryu, because in Kiwami 2 and 6, you couldn't juggle enemies for shit. Another thing, too, is these are more so just minor nitpickies. Finishing holds, by the way, combo finishers, grab finishers, if you will. Those were moved to Extreme Heat Mode exclusivity, which I don't know why. Another thing that was moved to Extreme Heat Mode, or I guess I should say removed from Extreme Heat Mode, was the fact that you were no longer invincible by default. For some reason, at the beginning of the game, if you enter Extreme Heat Mode, you can die while in Extreme Heat Mode. Which might have been the case for some of the other earlier games, but I may have forgotten. But I find it weird that you have to get the ability to not die in Extreme Heat Mode, when the whole shtick of Extreme Heat Mode was that as long as you had heat, you never were going to die. So it just feels weird that they removed it. Another thing, too, is that since there are two styles, they sort of nerfed the Yakuza style, which is Kiryu's classic Dragon Engine moveset. They nerfed it. They removed a lot of the stuff that you could do with it. For example, you can no longer grab enemies from behind. That is a thing of the past. You could not grab enemies from behind. If you grabbed an enemy from behind, Kiryu would just turn them around and grab them. So you can't do any grabs from behinds. They did make it easier to do the quick step attacks, but they didn't give like any of the corresponding heat actions to them. Like the one, I believe like the one heat action from Kiwami 2 would be the one where you would do like the front dash one and he would like do the uppercut. They changed that to the charged dropkick heat action. Another thing too is that the story is a little lackluster up until the end. The ending of the game is really strong. It is a fantastic ending. It's just everything else up to that point, not really all that on board with it, so to speak. Another thing I don't like is that in the Coliseum, they have a lot of stuff, like they give you a lot of options to play as a lot of characters, but if you got the Legendary Fighter Pass or something, the Legendary Fighter Pack, which allows you to play and fight against Daigo Dojima, Taiga Saejima, and Goro Majima, the characters don't have any heat actions or anything. So a majority of like their super niche stuff that they did, they don't have. And for example, the Majima fight, he has the Mad Dog counter from Zero, which is basically Majima's Tiger Drop from Zero. You know, Kiryu has the Tiger Drop and Majima has like a little stabby thing, and he could do that against you, but you can't do that as him. So it feels like removing the sort of heat action thing, because they have it set, so kind of like the clan creator Majima family stuff from 6 and Kiwami 2, where every character has like a unique sort of thing, and they have like a unique skill to them. I feel like it would have been better if like characters had just like heat bars, and you could do like basic generic heat actions with them, and Majima, Saejima, and Daigo could have like their own. I don't really know. For all those wondering though, it plays their Yakuza 4 themes. So it plays Saejima's Street Battle theme, it plays Receive and Bite You, and then for Daigo it plays a instrumental version of his For Faith. Automatically, that is one of my biggest cons right there, the fact that you have to pay to fight Daigo, Saejima, and Majima. That's one of my biggest cons. So if that is something that, you know, you hate, there's a point right there. Another thing, too, is the castle doesn't really have much to do in it. The castle's kind of, I mean, it's got the Coliseum, which is pretty much your go-to way of making money. But there's really not much else you can do in it. The only other thing you can do there is change how Kiryu looks, do gambling, and that's pretty much it. You have a casino, and you have a gambling hall. Really not much you can do on it. Another thing, too, is that the bosses have a lot of, like, either painfully generic stuff or reused. Matter of fact, if I'm correct, the first proper boss fight of the game just uses Kusei's moveset. So, if that's another thing you hate, you can chalk that one up on the board as well. And also, like, the actual bosses themselves do deliver immensely. Like, the boss fights are fairly challenging and rewarding to defeat, but it's everything else about the story that's like, It's definitely more so a quality over quantity sort of deal, because I guess, you know, obviously, if you have too many bosses, you know, each boss loses its own uniqueness, but then you go back to some of the other greats, like Zero, you fought Kusei like 5 times, and each fight with Kusei was memorable. So I feel like they could have spent a little more time cooking with the boss department, especially considering the majority of the bosses you fight are the same people. Pretty much fight the same people over and over. And in case anyone is wondering, no, you do not get to fight Ichiban. For some reason. I feel like they should have had that in, but you don't get to fight Ichiban as Kiryu. So, that's sad. It makes sense, though, I guess, because I guess for that fight they would have had to incorporate some sort of style switching mechanic, and it would be too improbable to code. But I feel like, you know, there should have been at least something. So, in my opinion, I really enjoyed Gaiden. Like, don't get me wrong, in the time I had spent, in the streams I did like around 2-hour streams, so I got about 8 episodes of Gaiden. 8 episodes, that's a fairly long playthrough, I'd say, for a Yakuza game. Although I believe my Yakuza 0 playthrough went up to like 20 parts or something, but all things considered, that's not terrible. I definitely wouldn't put Gaiden in any, like, Game of the Year category or anything like that. I wouldn't consider Gaiden the Game of the Year. But Gaiden's definitely very fun for me. It has a fantastic soundtrack in some places. The soundtrack is probably the most mid part of it all. Ironically enough, Sega, the music kings, essentially, they did not really cook with Gaiden, because if you think about it, Sega has some of the best music in video gaming history. Got Sonic, Persona, and Yakuza. Those 3 franchises alone are like some of the best music in gaming history, full stop. Especially considering what the fuck they did with Sonic Frontiers. Sonic Frontiers' soundtrack was legitimately one of the best things I've ever heard. And then Final Horizons happened, and that just added more bangers into the mix. But Gaiden just didn't get that much love. Gaiden has a few banger themes. It's got the Yakuza-style theme. It's got the sub-story boss theme. It's got the final boss theme. It's got a specific boss theme. But in general, a lot of the Gaiden soundtrack, they just did not cook with. So personally, if you're asking my personal recommendation, I would put the game at no more than a 7.5 out of 10. Because I liked it. It's a fairly long experience if you pad your time out and you start doing sub-stories and stuff. I imagine if you're someone who just wants to do the story, you're not going to be so keen on the game. But as it stands, though, I would not put it at anywhere above 7.5. I would put it above Yakuza 7, but that's for a whole plethora of reasons that when I finish Yakuza 7, I'll talk about. Although, nowadays, people made up their mind if they're buying Yakuza 7 a long time ago or not. But I feel like the story could have used a lot more work. The soundtrack definitely could have spent a lot of time more. I feel like they should have spent a majority of their time on the soundtrack. The soundtrack definitely needed some more antes upped. And the story definitely could have used some more chutzpah, so to speak. When was the last time you heard anyone use the word chutzpah? But in general, though, I think it is a fairly good game. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, if you agree or disagree with any of these points, you can, use these not as like a sort of thing where I'm flat out telling you buy it or don't buy it, but more so to sort of guide your way into naturally figuring out if you want to. Because, you may not like the fact that Kiryu has 2 styles, or you may not like the fact that the music's kind of mid. So you can use these use my words not as a means of a solid answer, but rather just a helpful guide as to sort of, influence your decisions, so to speak. I'm not directly telling you what to pick, but I am helping you weigh your options. Another thing I guess I should mention too is the sub-stories are nowhere near as funny as the previous games. There's a few funny ones in there, but a majority of them are really serious in tone. And also the whole Joryu erasing his name thing does kind of get used a lot. Kind of into repetition, to the point where it's like, alright, yep, I get it. Kiryu's dead, woo. So that can get a little annoying, but honestly, if you're asking me personally, I would say go for it. But, once again, I would recommend playing 6 and 7 first, before doing it. And yes, I do rank Gaiden higher than 7. But I would recommend playing the entire Kiryu saga, so that would be Yakuza 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, before playing Gaiden, because Gaiden has a lot of throwbacks to mainly 6 and 7, but there's some occasional throwbacks to some of the other games in there. So yeah, 7 out of 5 out of 10 for me. So if you're swinging on the fences of whether you want to buy Gaiden or not, use this video if it finds its way into your recommendations as like a sort of guideline as to if you want to buy Gaiden or not. And this is coming from like a Sega dick rider here, so I'm not, saying a 7.5 just to bring views. I'm saying this because it is my genuine opinion. If I wanted to bring in views, I'd say it's a 10 out of 10, best game ever made, should have won Game of the Year. But I'm not, so use this video to sort of point out some stuff. And also, if you want to leave your experience with Gaiden below, go ahead and do that. Chances are I'll reply to it. Maybe you'll have a different viewpoint about Gaiden than me. Maybe you'll like it more than I did. Maybe you'll dislike it more than I did. Maybe you'll have some of the things in there, some points that I liked you don't like and vice versa. So, if you wish, leave your opinion on Gaiden down below. I'll check it out and I'll rate it. And look out for the next video. So with that, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!